Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here. And we'll go ahead and get started with this panel. The title of our panel today is Should Texas Sunset the Sunset Commission? You know, the Sunset Commission was created, let me introduce myself. My name is Bill Peacock. I'm with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we're pleased to have you all with us here today and for the entire event. The Sunset Commission was created back in 1977 to identify and eliminate waste, duplication, and inefficiency in government. And early on, certainly, there were a lot of those types of activities taking place. A lot of boards and myriads of boards and commissions that just wouldn't seem to go away but weren't really needed were able to be eliminated through the Sunset Commission. A lot of unifying of certain practices, ethical standards, those types of things were able to happen through the process. But recently I spoke with Senator Ike Harris, who served on Sunset twice and was there when it was first passed and voted against it when it was first passed. And I asked him, well, Senator, why did you vote against the creation of the Sunset Commission? And he said that, well, I understand that there's going to be this body that kind of keeps an eye on all the state agencies and reviews them and stuff, but he wanted to know, well, who's going to review the Sunset Commission? Who's going to take an eye and look over that in its operations and practices? And so I think there's some that might suggest that there's perhaps a little bit of a mission creep at the Sunset Commission. With it's maybe expanded its borders beyond just identifying and eliminating waste, duplication, and efficiency. So anyway, we're here to talk about that today. It brings us to our question: should Texas sunset the Sunset Commission? Well, perhaps not sunset and eliminate, but there might be a way to review the Sunset Commission processes and see if it can be reformed and improved over time. We have some very excellent panelists here to discuss that today, and we'll start today with Representative Dennis Bonnen, who serves in the 25th Legislative District in the Texas House of Representatives. He was first elected to the legislature in 1996 and is beginning his 9th term of office this month. Speaker of the House, Joe Straus, appointed Representative Bonnen to the vice chairman of the Sunset Commission about 4 years ago, and now he currently serves as the chairman. And I know during his time in office, he has been one who has worked to ensure that the markets are not burdened with unnecessary regulations. And so please join me in welcoming Chairman Bonnen.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'll begin by really kind of immediately addressing your question of should sunset be sunset or should it continue? And I think the answer, in my view, is rather simplistic. Simply in the last legislative session, the last cycle of agencies, the changes resulted in more than $161 million in expected savings and revenue over the next biennium. So I can't justify, as someone who wants to create savings for the taxpayers of Texas, a reason to eliminate an entity that helps create $161 million in revenue savings to the state of Texas. Now, that certainly wouldn't suggest that you can't improve upon that process and you can't change that process. So, and that's only the beginning of the successes that Sunset has had. But one of the examples that I would like to use today, and we have Ken Levine, the executive director of Sunset, who does an outstanding job, and other members of his staff. One of the great things about Sunset, in my opinion, with respect to my two colleagues, the senators that are here, and myself, is that it's staff-driven in the beginning. And I think it's one of the cleaner processes we have in state government, because in reality, the electeds, the politicians, if you may, we don't write the report, and we don't tell them how to write the report. And I think it's very positive to have a group of, in lack of a better way to say it, investigators who go and dive deep into agencies looking for efficiencies and opportunities for improving their delivery of services to the citizens of Texas. And then the electeds have to stand in front of the public and say whether they agree or disagree or choose to modify or change that staff-driven report. As chair, I'm allowed to see that report basically the day before it's made public. I can tell you as chairman, I've never ever looked at it before then, and the reason I haven't is because I'm not going to recommend changes. And so if I'm not going to recommend anything to change it, I assume I ought to just see it at the same time everyone else sees it, because I think that's part of the importance of the way this process works. Let me give one quick example of where I do believe we could improve Sunset. And I want to be very clear about this. When I say improve it, it's only to make something that I think that works well and does good for our state better. And one way we can improve it is the example of the Port of Houston, which was reviewed this time. And if we had fewer agencies under Sunset, and therefore the elected members spent more personal energy and time diving deeper and farther into the specifics of these larger agencies, I think we could accomplish more. The example in the Port of Houston I'd like to use is that at the end of the day, it is a staff-written report. And staff does a great job over there, but they're going to be hesitant to be overly bold in some issues, example being the Port of Houston. The port desperately needed dramatic changes to their governance structure. But not being elected people writing the report, the staff, I believe, was hesitant to get that cavalier in their recommendation as to how to significantly change the governance structure of the Port of Houston. And so they came up with a recommendation that began the process of getting the electeds truly talking about the real significant changes that need to be made in the governance structure of the port. So I think if we dealt with fewer agencies in a cycle and dealt with the larger agencies, because in all reality, we still do sunset and eliminate agencies, but in reality, the greatest savings and the greatest return to the taxpayer of Texas is going to come from us diving very deeply into our large agencies, our multi-billion-dollar agencies, and going down to the lower levels. An example, and I will close with this, is we're presently reviewing, we've actually finished our review and we'll be dealing with during session on the Texas Education Agency. I'd make an argument that it wouldn't be bad for Sunset to actually take all education entities under that umbrella, and let's review TEA, but down all the way to the level of how we look at local government education issues, because it's interconnected, and there are tremendous savings that could be connected through having a deep, far, depthful look at all of that. And the final comment, and I think I already said that once, but the final comment I'll make on the must-pass provision, I want to compliment my colleague, Senator Nichols, our vice chair, who's been on there now for 3-4 years. I'm proud of the fact that Senator Hager, when he came in as chair, we worked very hard last session, and we're working hard again this session to remove the policy as best as we can out of the sunset bills. That is where the must-pass provision is very detrimental, is that it's when you actually allow people to really play games, and Senator Birdwell has been a real leader on that as well, and I'll use a word that some people think is a bad word. I think it's a great word. We're trying to be purist. We're trying to make sure we've literally voted against policy initiatives that we agree with, but they're policy initiatives and they don't belong in sunset. And so we've literally said we're going to vote no on this modification, not because we don't agree with the policy, but policy does not need to be happening. And oh, by the way, Senator Nichols and Senator Birdwell and Representative Bonin, when we don't put policy into sunset, we are reducing the power and the strength that we have in holding these roles in sunset. So it speaks a lot to what they're doing when we do that. But I think that's one of the most significant ways to improve upon the must-pass provision, which I think is important to have, but I think you need to make it work by not loading these bills with policy, and that's when the must-pass provision became problematic. And with that, I'll allow my colleagues to speak, or let you move on, Bill. Thank you for having me.
You know, last week I was walking around the Capitol trying to finalize all the details for this panel, and was looking for our next speaker's office, and it was while the Senate offices were all moving and no signs were up and you didn't know where they were, and there was no signs on the doors, so I'm sticking my head in every door trying to find it. And I finally stick my head in one door, and I feel like I was either in the Serengeti or on the slopes of the Himalayas or something like that. So I knew that I had found the office of our next speaker, Senator Robert Nichols. Senator Nichols was first elected to the Texas Senate in 2006. He represents 19 counties, including the greater part of East Texas and Montgomery County, Senator Nichols serves as the chair of the Transportation Committee and sits on the Health and Human Services Committee, Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and the Natural Resources Committee, and the Nominations Committee as well. And he serves currently as the vice chair of the Sunset Advisory Commission as well, and has authored legislation and passed that would protect landowners' rights, increase educational opportunities, and reform transportation policies. Please welcome Senator Nichols.
Thank you very much. I also would like to say how much I've appreciated working with Chairman Bonin. We've served on the commission together now for 4 years, and we statutorily are required to step off after 4 years, which I think is really good. That way you have, each of us has an opportunity to be on that commission for a number of years, limited number of years in statutes, and then we must rotate. And that always lets fresh eyes and ears come on that commission. I've very much appreciated the work that Representative Van Chia and Senator Birdwell have dedicated a lot of time over this since last session as well. I do appreciate the Public Policy Foundation and the work you all do. I've participated quite a few times. I think you all are working very diligently to try to make things better, and I think you do make things better, and I appreciate your viewpoints. I will say that I have a lot of respect for the Sunset staff. They put a lot of dedication. They're very professional. There's not a lot of turnover in that office. Very dedicated, very smart. They get to look at how other agencies operate, and they see the good things, they see the weak things, and they're able to take that knowledge of what's done better and go into some of these other agencies and apply them. Do they have weaknesses in the sunset process? Yes, there's weaknesses in the sunset process. There is no entity in government I have ever seen that could not do things better. We should always strive. I've never had a business that I've run myself that I knew I couldn't do better. And so you constantly strive to try to improve the process. But do I think the Sunset Commission is a positive thing for this state? Absolutely. Having served on it for 4 years now, I'm absolutely more convinced of that than ever. Maybe things need to be tweaked. I totally agree with Senator Bonham, Chairman Bonham. I almost gave you a promotion there.
As long as I can sit in the House and still be a senator.
What happens is, what happens is each of us in our respective duties to our districts spend an incredible amount of time in our districts on a wide number of issues, which develop a lot of times into bills that we're focused on. And as we get into the legislative process, we get buried sometimes. I think most of you who've worked around the legislature know that. It's really difficult for us to have time to analyze things other than what we have been studying, except what's in front of us with the bills that are coming, with the bills we're working on, with our constituents coming in. And it is extremely important, in my opinion, that we have a group of dedicated professional people analyzing our state agencies. I wish the federal government had something like that. I really do. I think that is one of the weakest things in our federal government because they have agencies that they don't even know that exist, that are constantly being funded. When we get into this process, and I'm sure everybody, each office kind of handles it a little bit differently, but the very first question is, what is your mission when we look at an agency? What is your mission? And you look at that mission. The second question is, does that mission still exist? Yes or no? And what we found last session was that in 4 of those cases, the answer was no. Your mission does not exist. We don't need to go any further down the question list. We had 4 that way. Texas Coastal Coordinating Council, which is probably one of the bigger ones, I actually served on it for 3 years when I was Transportation Commissioner for the state. After having served on it for 3 years, I knew it didn't need to exist. It wasn't that it was a bad agency. At the time it was created, I'm giving you an example. At the time it was created, it was with good intentions. There are so many different complications in the coastal area with environmental, permitting, with different agencies, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Texas Department of Transportation, Historical Commission, TCEQ, with the industries we have on our coast. So any big industry trying to get a permit was having to go to so many different agencies. And then they were told to do different things. It was difficult to do business on our coastal. So someone created, I don't even know how many years ago, the Coastal Coordinating Council to streamline the process. It didn't. It added one more layer. It actually went the other way. And so after we analyzed it and realized that mission did not exist, we chose to eliminate it. Some of the, I know in the recommendations of the Public Policy Foundation, that, we've been doing this for 20-something, almost 30 years now, going through the commission. We've already gone through the cycle through all these different state agencies. Haven't we already eliminated maybe the ones that we should have eliminated? If you'll notice, it's some of the smaller ones that you've never heard of, that when they reach that test, we eliminate. One was the Wastewater Research Council. How many people, other than the Sunset people, have ever heard of that one? We eliminated it. It didn't exist. Equine Research Advisory Team. How big of an issue is that in your district? The Electronic Government Management Office of the DIR. It just wasn't, it had a need when it was created. And those are those little ones you're talking about in some of your recommendations that if we didn't analyze, we wouldn't have caught. Maybe somebody 14 years ago when they analyzed it, the need was still there. We've gone through a lot of transition in electronics, but it doesn't exist today. I know that when we get past those first questions, I will tell you basically how we analyze it in our office, the process for some of you who don't understand it. The agency does a self-evaluation first. This is their own report card. They basically do an outline. Here's who we are. Here's our mission. Here's how our structured management is. Here's where our funding sources come from. This is what we spend. This is what we think we do well. This is what we think we've done poorly. If we could have this legislative authority, we could do much greater in this area, but we're restricted because we don't have statutory authority. So they make all these kind of the self-evaluation. I know that the Sunset team, for many of the things on accounting and internal auditing, stuff like that, they go in there and they not only evaluate and talk to people in the agency, they go out and talk to some of the members who have had issues. They go out and talk to, for instance, industry, who sometimes gets crosswise or strangled by some of the processes. They talk to lots of different people. And from all those, you get a totally different perspective that an agency could not get from itself. I know that if, like on Railroad Commission, that was a big one we handled most recently. In my district, I've got some oil patch out in my backyard in East Texas, but I've worked with people all over the state on it, and so we get a lot of calls. This is an opportunity to fix this and this and this and this. And so I pass that on to the Sunset staff so that they can go out and evaluate, and then we come up with these recommendations. And I think we did some voting yesterday, which you might go look at and kind of analyze. Had we not been reviewing those, we wouldn't have caught them. So I think some of the recommendations, I'll give you another example. Higher Education Coordinating Board. How are very important to the state of Texas. Who's going to be issuing what degrees, what colleges are going to be doing what. Very, very important. You have somebody in charge, a good, well-intentioned, very smart person with a good staff. All of us have a tendency to go in one direction on what we believe is the right way to do something. And so when I was asking, well, why are you going in this direction? Not that I disagree with the direction, but it's a direction. The response I got was, it's statutorily required. I went, really? So the legislature said you had to do that? Yes. My next question was, please bring me a list of the statutory requirements of the different directions. I was shocked. It was a stack this thick. There were 100 different statutory requirements of what direction you're going to go and how you're going to do it. And every session for decades, the legislature, somebody has a bill to tell them to do something, it gets passed, and then you're sitting there, you can't go in all these different directions. And so after we analyze those, one of the things we did is say, we're going to eliminate a tremendous number of these things, and we did. Not necessarily their authorities, but trying to give, that way the legislature can really give them more direction. But I think it's a very good process. I strongly support it. It's been an honor to work on it. I think it's one of the best. Whether or not I know one of the other issues was whether or not an agency should expire. That's a pretty serious thing, even when you're dealing with something like TxDOT, because everybody knows you got to build the road. If you did not have an expiration date so serious, these things would get postponed because it's inconvenient. I know I could have been working on a lot of other things. It would have been a lot easier to say, well, let's just do it 2 years from now or 4 years from now. Having a hard deadline, you have to take action. And the agency, I served over 8 years on the TxDOT commission. We took it real serious. I guarantee you, nobody wants to go through that thing, and it's that one point in time where everybody has to go really look and analyze how they're doing their work. I got 2 minutes left. I feel like I'm in a campaign debate now. Okay. All right. I'll sit down. But I do think without having an actual expiration date or something of a serious nature like that, it would just the can would get kicked down the road. And I also know that one of the recommendations was the agency should go to the committee that has substantive jurisdiction. And if you will look at the rules that we passed in the Senate yesterday, we now require that in the Senate. All sunset bills must go to the substantive committee.
And the House does that.
Do they? Okay,
Yes.
great. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Our next speaker is Representative Rafael Anchia. Representative Anchia was elected in November of 2004 and represents House District 103 in the 83rd legislative session now. And I would just say that he's coming on up, but I would just wanted to add that, we often find ourselves on opposite sides of the issues, but I always find that and see Representative Anchia's genuine passion for helping people in their plights and their needs up here in the legislature. So please welcome Representative Anchia.
So I want to thank Bill and the Texas Public Policy Foundation for inviting me today. I think we've made a grave error, though, in that you're allowing a House member to speak before a senator.
They did it
So, but at the same time, Senator Birdwell, you do get to back cleanup, which is the most important position of all. Again, thank you for inviting me. I won't take all of my allotted time, but I do want to share some ideas and experiences with you about my 4 years now on Sunset. I too will be coming off during this cycle and have greatly enjoyed the experience. From a very selfish perspective, as a relatively young legislator, Sunset has allowed me to have a broad survey of the executive branch. Often we spend time working on legislation and understanding how the legislative branch works, but we have very little exposure, unless there's some subject matter expertise that we might need on a particular bill that we're working on. We have very siloed exposure to the executive branch, and I've found that I've learned a lot personally from this process just about how state government works, and I think it's inured again selfishly to the benefit of the constituents I represent. So I think from a personal and professional development perspective, it's been incredibly valuable. I also believe that there's no crisis in the Sunset process. I think I really don't have any major criticisms of Sunset. I think it's actually a valuable tool, and I'll articulate some of those reasons in a moment. I do many times lament the fact that we have problems in our legislative process related to Sunset, and I think that's where many of the problems arise. I believe that we do not write good law on the House floor. And one of the challenges of having Sunset bills move through the legislative process, and I think Chairman Bonin discussed this previously, is that any great idea that are brought from the four corners of this state by the 150 representatives that are on the House floor that are somehow stalled in committee and never made it out, never were vetted, never were modified in committee, sometimes end up on sunset bills because sunset bills are so broad, authors are able to defeat points of order related to germaneness and get their proposals into a sunset bill. So Chairman Bonin and last session Chairman Hager on the Senate side have really tried to instill a lot of discipline on the 150 members of the House to ensure that we really focus on process and mission and agency function and not try to load up these sunset bills with legislation. I think it's incredibly challenging, and I think it is bad for the state of Texas when ideas that have not been thoroughly vetted, that maybe Bill Peacock hasn't had an opportunity to opine on in committee, or if he has and has successfully defeated a bill in committee, suddenly it appears as a wholesale amendment on a sunset bill. It is, and the temptation is great for members. Members want to let their constituents know that they're being active, they're being forceful, they're using the House process and the House rules to their advantage and to the benefit of their constituents. But I have found some of the worst policy that we have made as a House of Representatives gets put on a sunset bill with very little vetting by the body, by the committee process, and I think that is a great danger. It is not a criticism of sunset, it is a criticism of the legislative process vis-a-vis sunset. And I have tried to be very, to jealously guard those sunset bills as they come through. I carried the Racing Commission last session, and there were very prominent members who had ideas about the Racing Commission, including wanting to put sort of gaming-related legislation onto that bill. And thanks to the support of Chairman Bonin and really the collaboration of the different members of the Sunset Commission, we were able to defeat virtually all of those amendments. In fact, I think all of them, and keep the bill extremely clean. That gets very challenging sometimes, and bills get away from members. There have been sunset members who have been unable to weather the onslaught of amendments. You'll recall a session ago, you had a significant agency that was going through sunset, and that bill got loaded up with every amendment you could think of. And I think that author at the end of the day just threw up her hands and said, you know, I give up, I'm just going to accept everything. Now, the fail-safe is that we have conference, and that's why it's really important that we have a bicameral composition to sunset, because we're able then, if a bill gets out of hand either on the Senate floor, I know it never does on the Senate floor, but certainly if it gets out of hand on the House floor, we're able then to go to conference, and the composition of conference committees is usually highly populated with members of the Sunset Commission. We're able to go reach across the chamber to members of the Senate, and that's where we regain control of the legislation and say, hey, you know, it became a free-for-all on the House side. Senators, can we get together and strip all of this junk out so that we again have a clean bill? And that typically works very, very well, and we're extremely collaborative in conference to make that happen. But so my criticism is more of the legislative process than the sunset process. So I think sunset is a very necessary function, and it is necessary because the needs of the Texas population change over time. We are increasingly moving from a rural state to an urban state, and the composition of the executive branch and the functions of the executive branch need to change over time. The values of community also change over time, and those social values need to be reflected in administrative agencies and how they approach the public. Expectations related to transparency have changed over time. Certainly since we've been in either the Senate or the House, there is an increased emphasis on transparency. I mean, you read historical documents, or you read stories about how the Senate used to be or how the House used to be. Certainly not the paragons of transparency. I believe we really spend a lot of time. We campaign on it. We talk with constituents about it. And frankly, our constituents now demand it. So when you have an organization that maybe has not been reviewed in 12 years, social expectations, constituent expectations were related to efficiency and transparency have changed during that period as well. And the sunset process lets us instill some of those expectations into the governance processes of these entities. I'll give you another example of how I think sunset is incredibly valuable. And it doesn't even relate to the executive branch of our state government, but it allows us as lawmakers to put pressure on executive or quasi-governmental and quasi-governmental agencies in our respective communities. The North Texas Tollway Authority in the area that I live in the Metroplex, had been the subject of some significant scrutiny related to their toll collection practices, related to their procurement practices. They had legacy contractors in place since the mid-50s that they had not subjected to major procurement or unbundling of contracts. So there was a significant concern about their ability to be responsive to the public and transparent. Well, it allowed me as a member of Sunset to carry a sunset bill related to the NTTA and said, hey, y'all aren't being responsive to the 4 counties that appoint the members to this entity. So I tell you what, I'm going to work with Judge Self of Collin County, who's a Republican, and Judge Jenkins of Dallas County, who's a Democrat, and we're going to come put pressure on the NTTA through this legislative process. And simply the threat of sunset for this agency caused them to subject themselves to a 4-county local review. And while we were unable to get the sunset bill passed, ultimately, it was up in the scheduling bill until the last day of the session and was pulled out in conference. But just that threat and the fact that we had put up 120 votes on the NTTA on a couple of different occasions on the House floor really got people's attention. And they went through an exhaustive top-to-bottom multi-county review by the county judges, and I think they're a better entity for it. They're a more responsive entity for it. And I think, Bill, I think this organization had concerns about the NTTA as well. So it was a nice opportunity on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to put pressure on this agency and exact results. Even though they were never subject to sunset, they felt enough heat, and the legislature was able to express its sense in such a forceful fashion that they are a better organization for it. Now, you see that in a number of entities that may not be state entities, although they may be created in state statute by way of example. And I think there's a value to this process. I don't know how much time I have, but I want to be respectful of our Senate cleanup hitter, and then also of the questions that may come from the audience. So I'm going to yield the rest of my time, and thank you for the ability to participate today.
Thank you, Representative. Our final speaker today is Senator or Colonel Brian Birdwell. He's a native Texan, a decorated military veteran, and a lifelong conservative Republican, currently representing Texas Senate District 22. Serves as the Vice Chairman of the Higher Education Committee, the Vice Chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, and is a member of the Economic Development Committee as well. And, of course, is on the Sunset Commission and is a strong advocate, of course, up here in Austin for limiting the size and scope of government. Please join me in welcoming Senator Birdwell.
Thank you. Given that I'm a cleanup and I don't want to go to a full count, there's 3 rules of engagement: be good, be brief, be gone. So I will try to do my best, John, to not even have to look at your signs. How's that? There's some thank yous first. Obviously, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst for the privilege to be assigned these duties. I actually got to take a look at Sunset in government organization when I first arrived to the Senate last session, and I would second all of my colleagues' notion that Sunset has somehow become a Christmas tree that is bare, waiting for everybody to throw all their ornaments on it. I saw that in Sunset last go-round, so I would certainly concur there. Bill, thank you for the invitation to join you today. I would also thank staff members, too, because Ken, when I worked in the Pentagon, it was my duty to help prepare my boss for congressional testimony. So while I did not sit in your particular position, I did sit in your staff's position behind you, having prepared you for all the spears that you're going to catch, and I thought they did exceedingly well. With that, I would also say thank you to my staff, because it is your subordinate success that is your success. Many of the compliments that I've received for my performance or lack thereof in Sunset is due to Ben, my chief, Anna, my LD, and Stephen. We're going to work you as hard. So I appreciate their work. I came about this the process here in Sunset from a very military mindset perspective. I hope you don't mind. It's the culture that I was brought up in. I do not have near the operations research and systems analysis training that Senator Nichols had, but that's how I looked at it, because we were looking at functionalities, not specifically policy, and I thought Chairman Bond, and that was clearly the right way to go, because again, just as you're doing the sunset process, you don't want to hang more ornaments on that tree, and you're looking at functionality. In the military, when you have administrative intelligence, operations, logistics, communications, all those different functionalities, you're stovepiped, as Representative Anchia had talked about. You're looking at the tree of your functionality in such detail and depth. There's got to be somebody that's stepping back and being the integrating contractor across all those functionalities, and that falls to the Chief of Staff. Or in some types of arrays or staff organizations, it could be an Inspector General or others that do that. So clearly the answer to should you sunset is clearly no, because if you take away the structure to do that, you won't have anybody looking at integrating of across state agencies, whether it's efficiencies or duplications. If you don't have anybody doing that, then we will return to the pre-1977 era of we're all just going to put ornaments on the Christmas tree, and nobody's looking to see if the Christmas tree is going to fall over from all the ornaments we've hung on it. It was also about command relationships. There were a lot of things that, since Sunset's been going on for so many years, the ability to say, look at this glaring organization that we can completely get rid of. For TDCJ to come into the Sunset process and think we're going to get rid of them, and our entire criminal justice system would certainly be completely flawed. So a lot of what we do is looking at efficiencies, command relationships, where's the better place for this functionality to be organized. I learned a lot about the granularity down to individual sand level, and still clearly much more to learn of the different agencies that we looked at, and the depth of knowledge that's required, not only of the individual members of the commission, but Ken's team and his staff, the depth of experience that each of his team has to be able to do this every 2 years, completely every 12 years across over 100+ executive agencies is massive. And so I very much appreciated the depth of knowledge that they approached this from. And it was from their perspective that they did this without the political influence, or what we would call undue influence. They could simply go look at it structurally, and then let the members of the House and Senate that make up the Joint Commission take a look at it from that political perspective that it needed to have. A couple of things that I looked at, was very guarded with, that I don't know, given this is I'm the newest guy here, everybody else here has had more than one iteration. This was my first. So my only comment would be, if there was a way to, at least with so many entities, you can't do them all at one time. Is there a way to array them in a package where they at least are agencies that either have a mutual support or an integrating function together, rather than we looked at this one 6 years ago, we're looking at this one 6 years from now, and it would be better for Sunset to at least have a parallel view of two functionalities of agencies that have a if not similar function, at least a cross-coordination function, so that you can look at them at the same time and space on the battlefield in the same Sunset. That's really difficult, and I know Chairman Bonner, we did a couple of, we reviewed, recommended we keep it, but review it again in 6 years or 8 years, not the normal 12, to try to get to that. But that, again, you have to be very careful about putting 20 pounds of sand in Mr. Levine's 5-pound bag with so many agencies that are out there. The other thing I tried to do with my votes was to make sure that I did not beg a question or grant an implied permission to grow it over the next 12 years. That what we were doing was keeping us within a box that was not going to beg further expansion. That's really difficult to do, but like with our votes yesterday on Railroad Commission, I did concur with good government today, but I did not, I expressed a concern that in granting good governance today with the railroad commissioners and how we structure their elections and the like, that we were not begging that question for other statewide elected officials that we would not want to address in future areas. I could give you some examples of other votes. I don't need to do that. My fellow members have given you all the 10 ring examples that needed to be given. I would only give you these two things. Sunset is only as good, not of its legislation that created it, but the self-discipline of Mr. Levine and his team and the members that review it and how it's done on the floor in the legislature. It is only as good as the people that operate it. Second, the customer of Sunset is not the executive agency being looked at. It is the taxpayer being told to pay for it. And as long as we keep that mindset, Sunset will continue to be a very valued entity, and I think is one certainly that is not only good to keep, but necessary to keep. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Field. Thank you, Mr. Peacock. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We have a few minutes left for questions. I just want to throw out one to get things started to the panel. I think everybody acknowledged kind of sort of the Christmas tree effect we have on sunset bills, and you also acknowledged that the importance of keeping the must-pass provision. So my question to y'all is the discipline that you talked about, the self-discipline, the only way to do that, or are there some more systemic kind of changes that you could make to address that problem?
First, one point in line with that I'll make is that one of the member perspective flaws that I have tried to correct is that, and I don't want to offend colleagues, but I've almost laughed at some, and they've said, well, you know, I've got this great idea. In next session, next cycle, this agency's up, so I'm going to roll with it then. And I've almost had to laugh and say, the great value of being elected to the legislature, as I tell my constituents, is you can put any bill forward you're willing to put your name on. And so, and I remind them of that too when they call me up about, you know, someone's bills and say, well, you know, that's bad. And I say, well, that's his bill, not mine. But anyway, the mistake that I see colleagues make some of the time is that they say, well, I'm waiting for sunset. Why? If you have a good idea, create it as a policy initiative, file your bill, go through the process. And so part of why I raise that is that I've tried to make the argument to members, sunset's not where you make your policy. Don't make it there at all. And more importantly, don't wait for it. Go do it and go work through that process. But at the end of the day, we've thought a lot about rules changes, at least in the House, to try and affect it. And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to discipline. Representative Van Chia said it very well. The legislative process is what it is, and what I mean by that is it's about control, losing all control, and then regaining control. And you regain that control in conference. And it is like any institution, like any entity, whether it be a large corporate entity or a government body, the people and their integrity and their discipline and their principles are what will win out and are what will make it successful or not be successful. Senator.
I would think if we're talking about the weaknesses, I believe where we're
You're
going.
talking about the must pass and what do we do with it?
Oh, the must pass. We do something with it, and that is we've got certain agencies that the functions have to go on, like Texas Department of Transportation, Public Utility Commission, things like that, and we do create a safety net on the items that we know absolutely have to be there. Otherwise, they go through a one-year unwinding period, and so that's kind of how we address some of those things. And that's almost a, well, do you have it or do you not have it? There is a protection there. I don't think that's a weakness. I've seen in one occasion, since I've been on it in 4 years, Well, it turned out to be a disadvantage to have a safety net in there. Yeah, I feel pretty good about it.
Any questions from the audience? Like that? Yes, sir.
I live on Lake Travis, and I'm speaking just as a citizen. Has the LCRA ever gone under any kind of scrutiny or sunset review?
No.
And why would that be?
It's likely that they're just not in a regular schedule
they're-
of sunset. It's entirely possible anybody could file a bill and put them under sunset review. But because, are they considered?
I don't think they're
State
considered a
agency?
state agency,
Yeah.
is
I
the
don't believe
reason
they
they're
are.
not in a regular cycle.
What makes them not a state agency?
There are a lot of different quasi-governmental entities, which is also somewhat of a weakness in the structure. I want to go back and answer your first question. Last session, there was a bill to have all the river authorities go through a sunset. Okay? One of the things we do is periodically, we'll take an entity, it's an entity of its own. But we did have a bill to take river authorities, take them through the sunset process, just like this past session, the Port of Houston, which is not what you would call a state agency, there was a bill to take it under sunset, so we reviewed it. The members, House members and Senate members who represented that district, if they chose that they did not feel like their river authority must go through sunset, they didn't have to. That's kind of the way that was. Because
The bill lost, right? The bill never came through.
I think that all the river authorities weren't on there. Yeah, I don't know if it finally passed or not. But by the time members pulled some off, they were not all the river authorities on there. They started off all on there, but they didn't. So, you know, if you've got a real issue, I would suggest working with your House members, working with your Senate members on that river authority. Because the river authority, somebody's gonna have to be the authority of that river. But I will give you an example where an unusual situation, Texas Forest Service, which does trees, fires, disaster coordination around the state, is basically a division of Texas A&M University. It's the Texas A&M Texas Forest Service. Some of the members who represent some of those areas that's truly impacted 2 sessions ago decided that that agency needs to go to sunset because it was so big, it's such a small thing inside of Texas A&M, and we took it through sunset, and we made some changes, so it worked, but
Okay, so what I hear is that they're not exempt, we can get bills.
correct.
Correct. But they're not a part of the regular cycle because they're not a traditional state agency.
And I would also,
Well,
Right, yeah.
If you get
the
the
point
votes.
is, if you get the votes, you could put them into it, yes.
I would also, sir, I'd also make a suggestion that to the extent your quarrel with them is mission-related or governance-related, then sunset would be an appropriate forum. But if there's a policy matter, that could be done with a simple bill outside of the sunset process.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for participating today, and thank you again to the panel.